Welcome to Before Rome, Mediumship and God. This is episode 4, and I'm MaryAnna. We are going to go much longer on this episode, and I may do a little commentary, but this is a long one, and this is fairly in-depth. This is Before Rome, episode 4, the guest list. But first, the podcast itself is a show about allowing people to believe in mediumship without all the demon and the evil business, without the holy water and the fear. It's about understanding that the church, and the patriarchy right along with it, stole a history from us that was never theirs to take, especially from women. We have spent centuries doubting every bit of our God-given intuition just to fit in. About a year ago, give or take, I attended an Orthodox church in my area. I didn't have a clue what to expect. Legitimately, not one clue. I'd never heard of it before. My experience with the church has been Catholic, non-denominational, Christian, Baptist, Methodist, and I'm quite sure something that I'm forgetting. When I walked in, I was in awe, and I mean that literally for the definition of the word awe. It was dusky. There was not a fluorescent light to be found. The walls and the ceilings were covered in beautiful Orthodox art of Bible stories, saints, angels, and Old Testament figures I didn't recognize. The art was impeccable. The acoustics of the choir were immaculate. The church had 4 sections: the entrance, the north and south area, then the priest's area, and the ceiling was very high and very elaborate. The building was lit by candles and maybe a few low-light bulbs in the chandelier. It looked truly otherworldly and completely supernatural. I felt like I had legitimately stepped back in time. Now add that to the sound of the church bells, which I personally haven't heard in years, and I was really taken back. Could this be where I was meant to be? And where had this church come from? How old was it? Why had I never heard of it before? Who's in charge? And why are we all standing? Who are the saints that everyone is kissing? The church smelled of incense and candle smoke. The men wore their hair long, pulled back with facial beards. The women were wearing floor-length dresses and headscarves. It looked, honestly, like the most spiritual and frankly a little hippie place I've ever been, especially in regards to church. I have to say, I'm not an easy person to impress. It's annoying how hard it is to impress me, and I was frankly fairly speechless. The Orthodox Church doesn't hold a service like other churches. There is no sermon to speak of. If you want to learn more, you have to take the initiative and attend the after-school study class, which I did, and for good reasons. There were other reasons I was there, but it was so enlightening. And this is where I learned that they believe animals have souls. I'm like sitting there as an animal communicator. I'm like, hell yeah, now we're talking. And this is where I also learned that they venerate their dead, and they pray for intercession from their saints. Intercession. Intercession is literally asking dead people to help you out. Not with the lottery, although I'm sure someone asks, and that would be cool, but with things that really matter. Your family, your kids, a relationship that's falling apart, the stress that just won't quit, medical issues. And if you want specific help, you go to a saint with a speciality. For example, Saint Bridget of Ireland. She is the patron saint of poetry, midwives, and a handful of other things. If you need help in her lane, you ask her, and that's intercession. You are asking the dead to advocate for you. I told a friend about this experience in the church and the intercession and the saints, and she was aghast, like gaping open mouth, and said that it was blasphemous to pray to anyone other than God. And that reaction is so common that it reveals exactly what's underneath the whole argument. And that's control. The friend of mine who was just aghast had been taught that the line is between God and not God. Sacred or profane, authorized versus unauthorized. And praying to a saint feels like it crosses that line because it's not going directly to the top. By the logic of someone who objects to saint veneration, Praying to Jesus has the same problem. You are asking a being, a human who died, who exists now in a non-physical state, to hear you and respond to you. That's legitimately the same transaction. The only difference is which dead person you are talking to. So if the barrier between the living and the dead is passable, and every Christian tradition agrees it is, because God himself crosses it every time someone prays, then the barrier itself isn't the problem. The problem is the guest list. Someone decided which dead people you're allowed to talk to. God, yes. Jesus, yes. Saints, yes. But only the approved ones, only through official prayer, only in the right context. Your grandmother? Not on the list. And one of those reasons, maybe the main one, is that if you can talk to your own dead, you don't need the church to do it for you. And that aghast reaction isn't about theology. It's about a boundary that we were taught to feel rather than to examine. It's like sacred disgust, like it kicks in before the brain does. But let's return to the church for a moment. Before the schism of 1054, they had the early Christian church, or just the church. It was one body, or collective. In fact, for almost 1,000 years, Christianity was undivided. It started at Pentecost and spread through the Roman Empire and was held together, although that's a generous word for it, because they fought constantly about almost everything. They just had not officially divorced yet. So what the hell? Can I say hell? What the hell is Pentecost? Glad you asked. Let's be real, I have to do actual research for this show because I read Pentecost in one of my books and I was like, okay. So the idea of a church started 50 days after Jesus came out of the cave alive, i.e., when the Holy Spirit showed up.
According to the book of Acts,
the scared disciples had been hiding and had no idea what came next. Then wind filled the room, fire appeared over their heads, and suddenly these terrified people walked outside and started preaching to the world in languages they didn't even speak. That's Pentecost. That's the starting gun. That's when a small, frightened group became a religion. Before the Great Schism, the church itself was organized around 5 patriarchates, and that is not correctly pronounced, so I apologize. But the patriarchates, my goodness, were 5 power centers. Rome was one of them. Constantinople was another, but so were Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria. 5 heads. So there was not one pope calling all the shots. And they call it the Pentarchy. 5 patriarchates. I'm really butchering that, so you guys will have to look that up. So yes, you may think that I am the worst at articulation at this moment. However, they call it the Pentarchy, 5 power centers. The undivided church of the first millennium was led by 5 ancient seats: Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. And each one of those was founded by one of the apostles themselves. Rome and Antioch by Peter, Constantinople by Andrew, Alexandria by Mark, and Jerusalem by James. So this wasn't just 5 cities that got big and important. These were the original bloodlines, the apostolic roots, the places where the story actually started. Their relationship with each other, despite periods of rivalry and dispute, was generally one of fraternal equality. First among equals, that was the official position. Rome held the top seat, but was not supposed to be calling all the shots. Notice what's in that list. Jerusalem, where it all happened. Antioch, where followers of Jesus were first called Christians. Alexandria, one of the greatest intellectual centers in the ancient world. And Constantinople, the new capital of the empire. So these were not like backwater small towns, right? These weren't rural outposts. These were the centers of the known world at the time. And then one by one, the structure fell apart. In the 7th century, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria fell to Arab Muslim armies. 3 of the 5 gone in 1 century. That left Rome and Constantinople staring at each other across a shrinking empire with no one left to referee. We can probably guess what happened next. Rome kept pushing for one head, one authority, one guy in charge of everything, control. The East said no. The Orthodox position was always that bishops governed together, more like a confederation than a monarchy. So in 1054, the one church became 2. Rome went west and got more powerful, more centralized, and more institutional, and Constantinople went east and held on to more of the ancient and the mystical.
That's a simplification, of course. Both churches preserved ancient traditions, but they developed in different directions over the centuries.
Same origin, 2 very different destinations. And I cannot say this enough, this is the incredibly micro-short version of centuries of history. But that's not the actual fight. The actual fight was called the Filioque controversy, a single Latin word added to the Nicene Creed by Rome without consulting the other 4 patriarchs. The original creed said that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. Rome added, and the Son, Filioque in Latin. The East said, you cannot just edit the creed unilaterally. That's not a theological argument, that's a power grab. Who gave you the right to change a document that the whole church has already agreed on? So it was semantical, but the real injury wasn't the theology. It was that Rome did it without asking anyone. Control over the story is still control. But also the Orthodox Church and the way that they think about demons also fascinated me. They weren't presented as the Hollywood horror show I grew up with. The Desert Fathers, the early Christian mystics who went into the wilderness specifically to encounter God directly, they dealt with demons the way you would deal with a difficult situation. Be present, be real, but be manageable. They didn't consider themselves helpless. They were not automatically at risk. They engaged and realized they were more or less okay. As a book nerd, I went in search of their best resource for demons. And I found the book called The Life of St. Anthony. I bought it, read it in a week with copious margin notes and highlighted sections. And then I bought the Desert Fathers collection and then the Desert Mothers collection. I bought a lot of books, let's just be real, because that's what I do when I find a new hobby / passion / religion is I dive into books. I love books. I think we've covered that, right? The entire experience was and is so different from any other religion I had experienced that I was deeply interested and fascinated. These people are living in ancient ways in an extremely broken modern world. And I really thought I found my people. But I think you know where we're going here. It is the name of the podcast. Then we got to mediumship. Same line in the sand, same wall to bang your head on every single time. Mediumship is evil. Mediumship is full of demons. Mediumship is off limits. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Unfortunately, for all of my excitement, the priest that I encountered seemed off limits. He seemed an arm's length away, if you would, even frankly rude. That was my initial reaction when I asked one day if I could take photos or record the inside of the church. And I asked out of respect. And if you know me, you are probably surprised that I even bothered to ask. I would have never asked at another church, ones that are lit up and full of noise, but this place seemed so sacred. Unfortunately, the priest made me feel stupid for asking. He asked me why I would want to do that. I said the beauty of it and that so many people don't know it exists. He said the beauty doesn't translate to the photos anyways, so if I wanted to, sure, fine, I could. But why would I want to, right? Make sure that I didn't get anyone's faces in the photos. I did a few videos for myself, but by the end of the conversation, the energy told me I was just stupid for asking. He's now worried about my motives and he's looking at me as a possible issue. Cool, whatever. At the end of the conversation, I just felt like an unwanted child. So if I felt like a moron about photos, I'm certainly not going to ask him his opinion on mediumship. Let's segue into the next part. I got to work on my segues. So let's recap. The saints are dead. The saints are in heaven. The saints are accessible through prayer, and they intercede on your behalf. You can light a candle for them. You can pray to them directly. And by any functional definition, that is communication with the dead. In fact, the entire tradition is built on it from a time in history before the New Testament was written. But talking to your grandma Sally is demonic. I need someone to explain that to me. Because I've been doing mediumship for about 10 years now, and I cannot make those two things fit into the same idea. I listened to Orthodox podcasts who strictly condemn all forms of mediumship, divination, and spirit contact. They consider mediums as a grave spiritual danger. The Church teaches that any supernatural knowledge or contact with spirits outside of God is either charlatanism or a demonic deception, while they venerate saints and kiss pictures of saints and pray to Mother Mary and Jesus and the saints and ask for intercession. Make it make sense for me, somebody, please, somewhere. But let's slip into the future here for a moment. We've been talking about a time before the Bible, but in order to understand people and religion today, we need to use the Bible. One of the scriptures they use is Deuteronomy 18:9-3. So Deuteronomy 18:9, when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. I would agree with that completely if the detestable things of those nations are pedophilia, thievery, gluttony, dishonesty. Deuteronomy 18:10 says, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens or a sorcerer. So why on earth would a Bible verse say no one should be found making their son or daughter pass through the fire? The worship of Moloch sometimes involved human sacrifice in the fire. And this Bible verse is in reference to the worship of the fertility god Moloch. In Israel, the firstborn was to be given to him to serve him. In Canaan, the firstborn was to be sacrificed by fire to Moloch in order to ensure fertility. Moloch was a title for various Canaanite deities to whom human sacrifices were offered, which refers back to, I know this is getting very deep and it's hard to even get through when I'm reading it, but it refers back to Psalms 106, 37, and 38, which says, they even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons, and shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with the blood. Somehow that translated to anyone who practices witchcraft, anan, a verb meaning to practice soothsaying, fortune-telling, divining, or magic. While it is clear from the context and the versions that this term is used for some type of magic or witchcraft, its etymology is unclear. Therefore, the specifics of the practice it connotates are equally unclear. However, it is clear that it was strictly forbidden, and the one who practiced this act was detestable to God. But we need to define these terms because a medium is not a witch. A medium is not a sorcerer. A medium is not doing the things that they were condemning in the past. A medium is not one who interprets omens, although there is some fortune-telling aspects to mediumship, if you will. So we'll move on to Guzik, sorcerer. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but it's Guzik, and it means sorcerer. This has reference to those who use drugs or potions to cast spells, gain spiritual knowledge, or enter into altered states of consciousness. Okay, also not what a medium does, right? So let's visit that. The original term that people have translated to medium from the Bible, the original term that was used was necromancer. And the problem with that term is that when men, because women didn't translate the Bible, so when men translated the Bibles through the centuries, the term necromancer, which actually means a person who calls on the dead to intercede on their behalf in negative ways, i.e., bring death on so-and-so on my behalf, they are people who use the dark spirit, if you will, dark energies, to accomplish what they wish. They call on evil, they call on the devil, and they call on other entities to enrich their own lives in questionable ways. That is not a medium. So when the Bible first started, the term was necromancer. And through the centuries, for various different reasons, most of all control, that term was translated, updated, mistranslated, whatever you want to say, into the word medium. Those two words do not mean the same thing. And in the Septuagint, which is the oldest Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, dating back to around 200 BC, this is the Bible that most, if not all, Orthodox churches use. And here is the relevant passage, verses 10 and 11. There shall not be found in thee one who purges his son or his daughter with fire, one who uses divination, one who deals with omens and augury, a sorcerer employing incantation, one who has in him a divining spirit and observer of signs, questioning the dead. If we were to sit here and pick apart that one verse, I could do a whole podcast on just that one verse, because that is not what modern mediums do, and possibly has never been what mediums do. So here's the important part. The phrase, which I've already said, that they translated as mediumship in the original Greek is questioning the dead. So they took, what is that called when people take, I'm going to have to stop for a moment. All right, sorry about that little break. We're actually on the home stretch. So the part that I want everyone to understand is that the phrase that the people who have translated Bibles through the centuries, the part that they translated into the word medium or mediumship started from the word necromancy. And in the original Greek, all that means is questioning the dead. In fact, our definition of necromancy has even changed, and it sounds very much more scary than it would have back in the day. But that's it. That's it. That's the whole phrase. Not communicating, receiving, not being a vessel, not trance, not channeling, not... They simply said questioning as interrogating, as in ritual evocation through incantation, which is literally what they listed right before it. Those would be sorcerers, incantations, and magic rites. That is not what a medium does, especially not in 2026. A medium doesn't interrogate the dead through ritual magic. A medium listens, they are open to receiving information, they are there for closure, they're there for healing. But somehow, between 200 BC and right now, questioning the dead through dark ritual got quietly expanded to cover a woman in Colorado sitting across from a grieving mother and saying, "Your daughter wants you to know she's okay." One quick note about the word medium, because this gets oversimplified a lot. The Bible wasn't originally written in English. The Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew. Then it was translated into Greek, into what is now called the Septuagint. and much later into Latin and then English. Along the way, several different Hebrew words referring to spirit mediums, i.e., those who consulted the dead, diviners, and other occult practitioners, were translated in different ways depending on the language and the translator. That's why one Bible might say medium, another says spiritist, another necromancer, and another wizard. These aren't always perfect one-to-one translations, and scholars still debate the precise meaning of some of the original Hebrew words, terms. My point isn't that the translators were purposefully dishonest. My point is that translation is interpretation. Every translation has to make choices, and those choices shape how later generations understand the text. If we're going to build an entire theology around a single English word, it's definitely worth asking what the original word was actually meant to say. And in this case, a Hebrew word. So let's define a medium, and I've given you a little bit of it. But a medium simply listens to energy from the other side, our passed over loved ones. We interact with the energy of who that person was. We show that person's essence and soul still exist. We show that we do not just turn to dirt when we die. We go on to keep learning. We still exist somewhere, somehow, as people, as souls. Maybe not as people. I don't know what we are on the other side. I've even talked to people and animals on the other side who have jobs, who are going through their life reviews and realizing, oh, so that was an option. And they do this when they watch an effective parent, usually sometimes their children, parenting right and realize that was not the job that they did. People on the other side who are passed over offer apologies a lot. They offer support. They definitely offer humor. I get some of the funniest spirits. It's quite comical. And honestly, many of them just want to make you laugh and they want people to go on living. Mediums are simply showing that life does go on. We aren't conjuring the devil for you to become a serial killer. We aren't talking through demons. We aren't talking with demons. We are legitimately just reading a book of energy of your loved one who is trying to give you a reason to keep living. Nowhere in that definition is child sacrifice. Nowhere in that definition is the conjuring of evil spirits in order to mentally affect others. The official Catholic and Orthodox churches have taken a position that mediumship is necromancy when it is not. At least the Orthodox Church further claims that saint intercession and mediumship are fundamentally different practices. They're not. The Church claims that with saints, you're talking to them and asking them to carry your request upward to God. Information flowing up, but not down. But with a medium, information flows down from the dead to the medium to the sitter. And that's the entire theological argument, is the direction of the conversation. Frankly, I consider that absurd, because anyone who has ever had a reading, an evidential mediumship reading from an actual medium who's worth a shit, knows that the dead are doing both simultaneously. They are talking up and they are talking down. And anyone who has ever prayed to a saint and felt something, felt comfort, felt a shift, felt like their prayers were answered, they also know that the information is flowing in both directions. The Catholic Encyclopedia actually admits that the Church does not deny that, with special permission of God, the souls of the departed may appear to the living and manifest things unknown to them. So they're not saying it's impossible. Again, they're saying it requires a signed note from your mother to the principal. They require authorization. And that's that word again, right? And in more recent times, necromancy as a distinct belief and practice reappears under the name of spiritism. That's their word for what the modern medium movement became. They just kept relabeling it. When people catch on to what's going on, the goalpost keeps moving. By the people in charge now, keep that in mind. It doesn't keep moving from us. They changed the definitions. There's so many examples of this just in everyday life. I could do hours on the toxicity of moving goalposts. The churches approve of spiritual intercession as long as it falls into their very narrow definitions. But not you. No, you can't have all this power. Oh, silly you for thinking you could. Hell, saints have official feast days and gold icons and are put inside stone walls with candles and bells, and we are told to call upon them. That's what I do. I have that same conversation. It's just a different guest list. All right, so before I go, I'm also going to start doing commentary, short commentary, like 10, 15-minute commentary pieces. And they will be appropriately marked so that if you want to hear some just updated commentary where it's not as scripted and not as in-depth, those will be listed as commentary versus just the regular Mediumship and God episodes. So before I go, I want to leave you with a thought, a thought, whatever you want to call it. And that is that you don't need permission. You don't need a priest. You don't need a pastor. You don't need a bishop. You don't need a building to access whatever you believe God is. You don't need someone to tell you which dead people are safe to talk to or which experiences count as real. The sun is God, the wind is God. The thing you feel when you're standing outside at night looking at the sky and something moves in you, that's God, and that has always been God. So question everything, think for yourself, and remember that the wall between you and spirit was built by people, which means it was never real to begin with. I'm MaryAnna. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at beforerome.com. And now that we are 4 episodes in, I will be uploading episodes once a week. They should be loaded by Thursday. I'll see you next time.